By the early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire stood at a crossroads. Once a dominant world power, it now faced repeated military defeats, economic strain, internal unrest, and growing foreign interference. The leadership could no longer deny a harsh reality. Survival required deep structural reform. From this realization emerged the Tanzimat era, a sweeping attempt to modernize the state through new laws, education systems, and centralized authority. Whether the Tanzimat represented renewal or merely delayed collapse remains one of the most debated questions in Ottoman history. The pressures driving reform were relentless. European powers had surpassed the Ottomans militarily and economically. Repeated losses against Russia and others exposed weaknesses in administration, taxation, and defense. At the same time, nationalist movements were spreading across the Balkans, challenging imperial unity. Foreign powers increasingly intervened, claiming to protect minorities while advancing their own interests. Ottoman leaders recognized that traditional systems were no longer sufficient. The empire could not compete using outdated institutions while Europe embraced modern bureaucracy, professional armies, and industrial economies. Reform was no longer a choice driven by ambition, it was an act of survival. The Tanzimat officially began in 1839 with a public declaration promising sweeping changes. The state pledged to protect life, honor, and property, to reform taxation, and to regulate military service. These promises signaled a new relationship between ruler and subject, one based not only on obedience, but on legal rights guaranteed by the state. Central to the Tanzimat vision was the rule of law. New legal codes were introduced, inspired by European models but adapted to Ottoman conditions. Courts were reorganized and legal procedures standardized. For the first time, the state sought to limit arbitrary punishment and corruption by binding officials to written law rather than personal authority. Equality became a cornerstone of reform. The Tanzimat aimed to create a sense of shared citizenship among Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Religious communities retained autonomy, but the state emphasized equal legal status and obligations. In theory, this was meant to reduce foreign interference and foster loyalty to the empire rather than to religious identity. Education reform followed closely. New secular schools were established to train bureaucrats, engineers, doctors, and officers capable of running a modern state. Curricula included science, mathematics, law, and foreign languages. These institutions produced a new elite, educated, reform-minded, and increasingly influenced by European political thought. Centralization was another key objective. The government sought to reduce the power of local notables and bring provinces under tighter control from the capital. Tax collection was reorganized, censuses conducted, and administrative districts standardized. The goal was efficiency, consistency, and stronger state authority. Yet reform came at a price. Centralization disrupted long-standing local arrangements, provoking resistance from provincial elites who had benefited from autonomy. New taxes and conscription laws placed additional burdens on ordinary people, many of whom saw reform not as progress, but as intrusion. Economic challenges complicated the Tanzimat project. While reforms aimed to modernize the economy, the empire lacked sufficient industrial capacity. Trade agreements favored European imports, weakening local producers. Debt mounted as the state borrowed heavily to fund reforms, infrastructure, and administration. Financial dependence increasingly limited political independence. Social tensions also intensified. While legal equality promised unity, it often produced resentment. Some Muslims felt reforms favored non-Muslims, while minority communities doubted the sincerity of state protection. Instead of dissolving divisions, reforms sometimes sharpened them. The bureaucracy expanded rapidly, but efficiency did not always follow. Corruption persisted, and overlapping institutions created confusion. Reform laws existed on paper, but implementation varied widely across regions. In many areas, old practices continued beneath a veneer of modernization. Foreign pressure never disappeared. European powers monitored reforms closely, praising progress while demanding further concessions. Diplomatic intervention became a constant feature of Ottoman politics. Reform, intended to strengthen sovereignty, sometimes increased vulnerability. Despite these challenges, the Tanzimat transformed Ottoman political culture. Concepts such as citizenship, rights, and legal accountability entered public discourse. Newspapers, debates, and reformist circles flourished. A generation emerged that believed the empire could be saved through rational governance rather than tradition alone. Yet time was not on the empire's side. Nationalist movements gained momentum, particularly in the Balkans. Military reform lagged behind political ambition. Economic dependency deepened. Each crisis raised the same question. Were reforms too little, too late? By the late 19th century, it became clear that the Tanzimat had not fully achieved its goals. The empire survived, but remained fragile. Reform slowed collapse, but did not reverse decline. Structural weaknesses persisted beneath modern institutions. Still, to view the Tanzimat as failure alone would be misleading. It represented a bold attempt to adapt an ancient empire to a modern world. It challenged entrenched interests, redefined governance, and reshaped society. Many later reforms, and even the foundations of modern states that emerged from the empire, were built upon Tanzimat principles. The Tanzimat era stands as a moment of reckoning. It revealed the difficulty of transforming a vast, diverse empire under pressure from within and without. Reform was necessary, but it demanded unity, resources, and time, commodities increasingly scarce. In the end, the Tanzimat was neither complete renewal nor immediate collapse. It was a struggle between past and future, tradition and change, survival and dissolution. The empire did not fall during the Tanzimat, but it never fully escaped the crises that made reform unavoidable. History remembers the Tanzimat not as a simple answer, but as a question, one that still resonates. Can reform save a system already in decline, or does it merely redefine the terms of its end?